Hi, 5th grade. It's Mrs. Skioka with your flipped math lesson for today, 7-3. Today's objective is I can use reasoning to correctly place the decimal point in the quotient. So you're going to use reasoning, what makes sense in the problem, to put the decimal point in the right place in the quotient, which is the answer to the division problem. So we're going to use number sense to tell where to place the decimal point in this problem. We had $15.50. We're going to divide it by 25 cents. And our answer is 620. It's missing a decimal point. Where are you going to put the decimal point? Okay, so you have the answer, you just are missing a decimal point, and you have to put it in the correct place. So I drew the problem out so I could visualize it. I thought that'd make it a little bit easier for me. So I have $15 drawn by the $10 bill and then the $5 bill, and then I have 2 quarters, so that equals $15.50. And then I was thinking to myself, well, how many quarters are there in $15.50? Because 1 quarter equals 25 cents. Okay. So the problem is just basically asking me, if I had $15.50, well then how many quarters are there? Okay, so now I know what it's asking me. I need to think about what operation I'm going to use. Well, I'm using division because I'm dividing $15.50 by 25 cents. And it already gave me the equation, but I'm going to just take the dollar signs out so it's a little bit less confusing. So I have 15 and 15.50 or $15.50, and I'm going to be dividing it by 0.25, and then it gave me I think it was 620, and I have to find out where that decimal point is going to go. Whoops, 0 there. Alright, so there it is written again. Some things that I want to keep in mind is that 25 cents is a quarter, and I know that there are 4 quarters equals $1. Okay? And if I can keep that in mind, that's going to help me figure out, well, then how many of these quarters in dollars are there in $15.50? Okay? That's using number sense. That's figuring out how numbers are working together. Some other things to keep in mind. Okay, this one is important. This one's going to help us with division, with decimals, is that when we divide a decimal dividend, okay, dividing a decimal dividend, that means the dividend is a decimal that is greater than 1. By a divisor that's less than 1, it's going to equal a quotient greater than the dividend. Now that's kind of confusing, so I drew it out for you. If you have a dividend, okay, and you're dividing it by a divisor that's less than 1, and I know it's less than 1 because there's my decimal point, it's 0.25, that's less than 1. If we have that situation where you're dividing something that's less than 1, then the quotient is going to actually be bigger than the dividend. Okay, the answer is going to be a bigger number than the dividend. Okay, so keeping that in mind with our answer here, 620, if I'm going to put the decimal point, if I put it right here, I would get 0.620, which is about half. Okay, and half of something is less than 1, and my dividend, my dividend is 15.5. It's close to 15, so I'm going to get an answer that's bigger than 15. So my decimal point can't go there. If I put my decimal point between the 6 and the 2, well, that's 6.2. That's almost 6, which is still smaller than the dividend. My dividend is going to actually be smaller than the answer this time because this divisor is less than 1. Okay, so my decimal point can't go there either. So that means my decimal point either has to go right here to make the answer 62, or it has to go here to be 620, because both 62 and 620 are bigger than the dividend 15.5. Okay? So that's just a trick to keep in mind to help you know where to put that decimal. That if this is less than 0, or I'm sorry, less than 1, and this is greater than 1, then the quotient is going to end up being bigger, a bigger number than the divisor or the dividend, okay? All right, so that's just something to keep in mind. All right, so I've remembered, I've gone back to that there are 4 quarters in a dollar. I have $15. So I'm going to think about what's 4 times 15. Well, I know 2 times 15 is 30. So 4 times 15 must be 60. And then there was 50 cents, $15, 50 cents, so plus 2 more. So that's going to equal 62. So therefore, the decimal point has to go right there, okay, between the 2 and the 0. That's using number sense to figure out my answer. So how do you know where to put the decimal point? Well, that's the question for today. How are we going to know where to put the decimal point? Now, if you have a dividend and this number over here, the divisor, if it's bigger than the dividend, then your answer is going to be less than 1. Okay, this is a second trick to keep in mind. If this divisor is bigger than the dividend, then your answer, the quotient, is going to be less than 1. Okay, it's going to have a decimal point, and then it's going to have an answer. Okay, so let's take a look at that. Okay, so here I have my dividend is 6. My divisor is 12. So I've got 6 divided by 12. Okay, so imagine you have 6 cookies and you're dividing them between 12 people. So you have 6 cookies, 12 of your friends are there with you, or 11 of your friends are there with you. There's 12 of you all together, and everybody wants some cookie. So what are you going to do? Well, you're going to split the cookies in half. Okay? How many halves would you have then? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, so how did you get the 12? You had to split them in half. And how do you write the number half? Well, you could write it as a fraction, right? But we're not doing it with fractions right now. The other way to write half is 0.5. So 0.5 is the quotient. Okay, so if this number is bigger than that number, then you will always end up with a number that is less than 1 that starts with a decimal point. Okay, that's how that works. Let's practice, okay? So where does the decimal point belong in the quotient? So we're going to have some equations, and you're going to have to figure out where the decimal point goes. So here's our first number, our first problem. 7.68 divided by 1.5, and it's going to equal 512, but we need to put the decimal point in the right place. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to change these numbers to some compatible numbers, and then we're going to use our reasoning to figure the problem out, okay? So 7.68 is actually closer to 8 than it is to 7. So I'm going to go ahead and just round that up a little bit, okay? And we've got 1.5, okay? 1.5, I could think of it as 1.5, I could think of it as 1.5. And I know that 1.5 is right in between 1 and 2 on the number line. Okay, sorry, that's kind of a strange thing to draw. So I've got the number 1, I've got the number 2, and 1.5 would go right there. 1.5 is going to go right there. Okay, now if I divide 8 divided by 1, that's going to equal 8, right? If I divided 8 by 2, it's going to equal 4. Okay, so my answer is going to be somewhere in between 8 and 4. About halfway between 8 and 4 is 6. Okay, so my answer is going to be kind of close to 6. So I've got 5, 1, 2 as my answer up here. Where am I going to put the decimal point? It's going to show that it's kind of close to 6. Well, if I put my decimal point in front of the 5, that's 0.5. That's not close to 6. That's less than 1. If I put it right here, it's 5.1. Well, it's 5, right? If I ignore what comes after a decimal point, it's 5. And that's really close to 6. If I put it right here, well, that's 51, which is way, way bigger than 6. So it must go right there, 5.12. Okay, this is using reasoning to figure it out. I'm just being logical about how to do these problems. Okay, number 2, 256.5 divided by 2.5. Okay, I'm going to change 256. I'm going to just change that to 250, make it a little easier to work with. And I'm dividing it by 2.5, 2.5. Okay, now if I look at it on a number line, we got 2 over here, we got 3 right there, and there's 2.5. Okay, so it's just right in the middle. So if I think about what would be 250 divided by 2, well, that equals 150, or 125, excuse me, 125. If I had 250, I'm going to divide it by 3 now. Well, let's see here. 240 divided by 3 is 8. So it's probably going to be like around 80-ish. Okay, somewhere around there. I'm just kind of doing some estimating there. Okay, so my answer has to be somewhere in between 80 and 125. Okay, so I'm looking at my quotient up here, 1026. I'm deciding where to put that decimal point. My number has to be between 80 and 125. Well, if I put the decimal point in front of the 1, that's less than 1, that's too small. If I put it right there, it's 1.0. Still too small. It's just 1, right? If I put it right here, and I've got 10.26, which is still really, really small. Remember, I've got to get that number between 80 and 125. Okay? If I put it right there, whoops, sorry. If I put it right there, then I've got 102.6. 102 is between 80 and 125. So that's where my decimal point goes. Let's try number 3. 1,127.84 divided by 3.8 equals 2968. Okay, so I'm going to change these numbers to numbers that are easy to work with. 3.8 is kind of hard, so I'm going to change that to 4. Okay, so I'm going to be dividing a number by 4. And 1,127.84, that's hard for me to think of in my head, so I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to round it to a compatible number, and I'm going to round it to 1,200. Okay, now this one's not too hard because I know that 12 divided by 4 is 3. Then I'm going to annex those zeros, add them on the end. So my answer is going to be kind of close to 300. Okay, so where could I put the decimal point in my numbers up here? Where would the decimal point go that equals close to 300? We'll go right here, between the 6 and the 8. Okay, number 4. 196.8 divided by 0.1968 equals, and then I've got 10000. Okay, as I look at this problem, I notice that these numbers are exactly alike except the decimal point has shifted. Okay, so I have 196.8, and I notice that decimal point has moved over 2 spots. Oh, I'm sorry, 3 spots. 1, 2, 3 is moved over 3 spots to get over here. And I know that when my decimal point moves over, that is a 0. Okay, that's a 0. That's dividing by 10. That was being divided by 10. Okay, so every time I've moved a spot, that's a 0. Okay, and I'm going to put a 1 in front of it. So my answer is probably going to be 1,000. So I'm going to put that decimal point right there so it equals 1,000. Okay? I could check it and see if I'm right. We learned the other day that if we have a number like 196.8 and we divide it by like 1,000 numbers that end in 0, we count how many zeros there are and we move that decimal point that many places. 1, 2, 3. So I move the decimal point right here. So now it's 0.1968, which is the same number that we had in our problem up here. So that's the right answer. Okay, you're going to try some now. Your turn. You're going to use your number sense to decide where the decimal point belongs in the quotient. Okay, you're going to have a few problems. Pause the recording and then see if you're right. Number 5, 14.73 divided by 6.96, and it's going to equal 211637. See if you can find out where to put the decimal point. Okay, so I'm going to change these numbers to compatible numbers that are easy to work with. 6.96, that's really close to 7. I'm going to keep this as 14 then. 14.73, even though it's closer to 15, I'm going to keep it as 14. It's 14 divided by 7 equals 2. So that means that my answer is probably being close to 2. So I'm going to guess that that decimal point is probably going right there between the 2 and the first 1. Okay, let's try number 6. 20.15 divided by 31.2 equals 64548. Figure out where that decimal point goes. All right, so what you're doing is you're dividing 20 by 31. Remember, if you divide a number by a bigger number, the answer is going to start with a decimal point. It's going to be less than 1. So that means that that decimal point has to go right there at the beginning, 0.64548. Okay. Number 7, 0.985 divided by 0.504 equals, and you have this big long number. Let's see if you can figure out where that decimal point goes. Okay, so I'm going to round some of these numbers to help me look at this a little bit easier. So I've got 0.985. If I round it up, then that is the number 1. Okay, divided by, and then 0.504, I'm just going to round it to 0.5. So I've got 1, I'm dividing it in half. So if you have 1 candy bar and you divide it in half, how many pieces do you have? We have 2, right? So what number would be close to 2? Where could I put that decimal point so it would be close to 2? If I put the decimal point right here between the 1 and the 9, I get 1.9. If you round that up, hey, guess what that is? 2. Okay? Alright, so let's try this one. 107.22 divided by 0.991 equals 10819374. Give it a try. Alright, again, I'm going to round these numbers so that they're easy to work with, okay? So I get 107.22, so I'm going to round that just to 107, okay? Divided by 0.991, I'm going to round that up. That's really close to 1, okay? What's 107 divided by 1? 107. Where am I going to put the decimal point that's going to be close to 107? I see 108, 108.19374. That's pretty close to 107. Okay, so there we've used our reasoning to find the answer. All right, guys, I think that we are all finished for today. Have a good night. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.